Finally, the Ukrainians have signed on the dotted line. Now, this might be a move towards peace. Now, all of this has happened, and it's not to say that from this point onwards, it's just going to be peace and strawberries and cream. I would just like to say it's progress if you look back over the last 3 years. So we'll have to watch the space and see what it amounts to over time.
States has signed a long-awaited deal with Ukraine, securing access to the country's natural resources. The agreement includes the creation of a shared investment fund to ensure Ukraine's economic recovery after the war. Well, it was signed by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, who flew to Washington to sign the deal on Wednesday. Well, the deal gives the US access to the country's energy infrastructure, oil and gas, as well as precious metals. Ukraine says the partnership will be equal on a 50-50 basis. The resources will remain the property of Ukraine. In exchange, a joint investment fund will be set up to pay for future US military assistance and reconstruction efforts. Crucially, unlike previous drafts, the fund will not be used to pay off Ukrainian debts for the billions of dollars of US assistance already provided. Here's our North America correspondent, Jake Kwan.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
It appears certain that no deal could ever come after this. President Zelensky left, leaving the minerals deal on the table. Then came this surprise meeting. Trump and Zelensky were meeting at the Pope's funeral last week. Just the two of them, 15 minutes, no interruption. And today, Ukrainians have heard the warmest language Washington has spoken since President Trump came to power.
Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term.
It's a fair deal, Ukraine says. Kyiv will put up the money by selling licenses to develop its oil, gas, and minerals. And the U.S. will put up either cash or any future weapons they send to Ukraine. The joint investment fund will pay for reconstruction and energy projects and pay dividends to investors. It's a much better deal than the one Mr. Trump proposed earlier, which would have put Ukraine in debt for the weapons the U.S. already provided. It's a moment of diplomatic victory for President Zelensky, who wanted to tie Washington to his side by giving them a skin in the game. It will take years before the deal can bear fruit, but its signal is immediate. The U.S. will not abandon Ukraine. The news is a blow for Moscow. An easy victory seems no longer likely. Washington is forcing Mr. Putin to rethink his calculation, and the peace deal may be closer. And for the people in this city, the deal cannot come fast enough. Jay Kwan, BBC News.
Well, this deal comes as Russia has continued to carry out attacks in Ukraine, hitting more civilian targets. Officials in the city of Odessa say at least 2 people have been killed, 5 others wounded in an overnight drone strike. The regional governor said the attack damaged residential buildings and a school, adding that fires had broken out in some areas. Odessa, strategically important port city on the Black Sea, and has been repeatedly attacked since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, February 2022. Well, overnight drone attacks also being reported in the eastern city of Kharkiv, where the authorities said a petrol station was hit there. Well, we can speak now to Hannah Shelest, who's in Odessa, also Director of Security Programmes at the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism and Editor-in-Chief at Ukraine Analytica. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you for the invitation.
So we're going to talk about the deal, but first of all, you are in Odessa, just underlining there another difficult night.
It was one of the worst nights, at least the last year. It was really terrifying. We are approximately 1 kilometer from one of the targets where Russians aimed their Shaheds. That area is quite residential. As we know, it is the school and the residential building that have been burned. Another high scraper in a different district around 15 kilometers from us being targeted. And the sounds, I would say that living 3 years here in Odessa, that was one of the worst nights for me, because you heard both the very heavy explosions that even 1 kilometer from the epicenter of these, my windows being trembling, really scaring. But also when you hear the sounds of the shaheds when they're getting lower, that's really a very terrifying sound. And we used to think that we already acquainted to most of these fear that Russia is sending against the residential areas.
Hannah, thank you for painting that picture for us. Let's turn now to the diplomacy and that deal that's been signed. What do you make of it?
There are good and bad news. Luckily, there are more good news in it, and probably that was worth waiting these additional months to make this deal beneficial for both sides. I would say that it is a huge success of the Ukrainian negotiating team, because first of all, it is nothing about the debt that Ukraine never had against the US. The second, that it is the equal partnership, 50-50 for Ukraine, both in terms of the
The US and Ukraine have finally sealed their long-awaited deal on access to Ukraine's natural resources, and it is being interpreted by some as a win for President Zelensky of Ukraine over Donald Trump. Is it? And what does that mean for the rest of the peace process in Ukraine? We will discuss all of that on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. What's actually in the deal? What does it mean for the relationship between the US and Ukraine? And what does it mean for the wider process of negotiating an end to the fighting after Russia's invasion? The person who can tell us, or at least help us work it out, is the BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, Adam. Good to be back.
Thanks for coming back. I've not actually had a chance to read the text of this whole deal yet, which is something I usually like to do. Do you want to just break down the key elements that I'll find there?
The whole, when you read it, you'll see that it's in rather legalistic language. There's a lot of whereases and things like that in it. It's about 9 pages long. However, I think main points, certainly as presented by the Ukrainians, I've got a list here, so I'm going to be reading bits of them. The Ukrainian minister, economy minister who signed, who's also the first deputy prime minister, Yulia Sviridenko, this is her summary of it, okay? She said, this is a good deal for Ukraine. Full ownership and control will remain with Ukraine. There'll be an equal partnership. National property, she said, is protected, i.e. Ukraine's national property. The deal, she made this point, does not mention any debt repayments by Ukraine to the USA, though when I went through it just a few minutes ago, I did notice that there's also a clause in it that says that if the Americans give more, after the deal comes into force, give them more military equipment, then the value of that will be included in the American contribution to what's going on. So it's not like it's all going to be coming for free. And there's also the point that she keeps saying in big capital letters, new licenses, new enterprises. In other words, there's no element of backdating it, because to start with, in the earlier versions of it, and the things Trump was saying, there were suggestions that he might kind of retroactively want to take over the entire Ukrainian nuclear industry. They've got a lot of nuclear power stations that, dating back to the Soviet times. So they are saying that they managed to get a good deal. And I suppose you might ask, is that because Zelensky actually stood up to Trump? He didn't, get into a crouch position and do as he was told, perhaps. But I think what it does do, though, the big absence from the Ukrainian point of view is there are still no overt security guarantees, and that's what they wanted in return for some kind of deal like this. So their hope would be that this actually means that Trump and America are somehow committed to the long haul, to their existence as an independent country. I mean, I think that is a moot point, actually.
Why do you say that?
Well, because you can imagine that if suddenly they weren't fully independent, or if Russia took over bigger parts of it, in some sort of future deal, or maybe if they, scored military victories, would the Americans make deals with the Russians about rare earths, many of which actually are in areas which are in the war zone, or even in areas which are now controlled by the Russian military? Would the Americans make deals with Moscow about that? They might well. They won't necessarily say, well, I'm sorry, we had a deal with the old government. So, I mean, I don't really necessarily buy this argument that just by investing, it's almost like a security guarantee. My experience in many wars over many years is that when, the balloon goes up, one thing that you always see are multinational countries and multinational companies, I should say, including American ones, doing all they can to get their expats out and safe ASAP. They're not there, they don't suddenly put down their tools and pick up weapons and become a militia. Nothing like that.
Well, better something than nothing. And as I said, it's something that's been done towards a move towards some kind of a peaceful resolution. Before we go, I'd just like to have a quick word from our video sponsors, which is smalldebts.co.uk. If you are having trouble with any kind of online transactions, you've been scammed, conned, or ripped off, and you need someone to assist you to get that money back, or you're due for a rent deposit that hasn't been returned to you from your landlord or estate agents, smalldebts.co.uk can help you out. If you're based in the UK area, look them up.
Have you been unfairly charged or conned by a company? At Small Debts, no company is too big and no debt too small. Small Debts is here to help.
So for now, gonna say bye, and I'll be back around for some further updates in the coming days. You've been here with myself, Onyu Adye, here at CornerSpeak. Be good, be safe, be creative. I'm out.